This is a key to topic 24, part B, worksheet 2. And on this worksheet, there are four problems, four polynomial functions, and they're all cubic functions. And so you want to list, in each one, you want to list all possible rational zeros. Then you want to use synthetic division to find one rational zero and use the depressed polynomial, which is your quotient, to find the other zeros. And then the last thing you want to do is to factor each polynomial. All right, so for each function, you do a part A, part B, and part C. Okay? All right, so let's look at the first one. So here's number one. So number one, um, you have f of x, which equals x cubed minus 3x squared minus 6x, and then plus 8. Okay, so plus 8. And then you want to find, first thing you want to do part A. Part A is you want to list all possible rational zeros. So we're going to list the zeros, rational zeros. All right, I'm going to list all rational zeros. Okay, so remember in a previous worksheet or in a previous lesson, you learned how to find those rational zeros. So to find the rational zeros, we're going to list that here, and then here's going to be the work for that. So for this one, so it's in descending order, right? And so it's, remember, P divided by Q. So P divided by Q. And so P would be the factors of 8. So the factors of 8, would be plus and minus 1, plus and minus 2, plus and minus 4, plus and minus 8. And then Q would be the factors of the leading coefficient, which is 1. So Q would be plus or minus 1. And so P divided by Q then would be plus or minus 1 divided by plus or minus 1. All right, so plus or minus 1. Then plus or minus 2 divided by plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2. Then plus or minus 4 divided by plus or minus 1, plus or minus 4. And then plus or minus 8 divided by plus or minus 1, plus or minus 8. So that's part A. Okay, so that's part A. And then part B says this. All right, so part B says this. So you want to find, you want to determine which of these rational zeros is a zero to this. And then once you find a zero, then that quotient you're going to get when you do that long division or synthetic division will be quadratic, and then you'll be able to factor and find those zeros. So that's the process you're going to use. All right, so you want to use synthetic division to find one rational zero. So for example, and let's suppose you try -1, let's say. All right, so -1. Let's try -1. And remember, when using synthetic division, you're going to list all these coefficients in descending order. So 1, then you have -3, then you have -6, and then you have 8. All right, so then you're going to bring down the 1. Then remember, -1 times 1 is -1. Then you add. -3 and -1 is -4. Then you multiply. -1 times -4 is a +4. Then you add. -6 and 4 is a -2. Then you multiply. -1 times -2 is +2. And then you add, you get 10. Notice that this is not 0. So since it's not 0, -1 is not a 0. All right, so you got to try something else. So let's try +1 instead. So let's see if 1 is a 0. So we do the same thing, same coefficients. 1, -3, -6, and 8. Bring on the 1. 1 times 1 is 1. Add, you get -2. Multiply, 1 times -2 is -2. Add, -6 and -2 is -8. Multiply, 1 times -8 is -8. And when I add, I get 0. And so there we go. So my remainder is 0. Since the remainder is 0, remember what that means? That means that 1 is a 0. Okay, so 1 is a 0. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to find the other zeros. Now remember, this was cubic, right? So remember, when you do long division or synthetic division, remember, these are the coefficients of the quotient. Now this is my depressed polynomial, sometimes called the depressed polynomial. Some textbooks will use that word. So the depressed polynomial is this now. So it's 1x squared. So remember x squared and then x. Because remember, this is cubed, so you go 1 degree less. So x squared, so you have x squared minus 2x minus 8. And all you do, remember you're gonna set that equal to 0 to find your other zeros. So we're gonna factor. And so when I factor, I get x minus 4, x plus 2, right? And so my other zeros, to find your other zeros, is going to set that equal to 0. And so I get x equal 4 and x equal negative 2. All right, now remember, so this said this. So it said use the depressed polynomial to find the other zeros. So my zeros are, we found one here, so 1, 4, and negative 2. So this polynomial, remember, one of the things you learned was that, see, the degree is 3, so I'm going to have at most 3 real zeros. And so the 3 happen to be rational. So I have 3 rational zeros. Okay, now part C, now don't make part C difficult. Part C is easy because all you want to do is factor this polynomial now. So you're going to say f of x, and you see you have 3 zeros, right? 3 rational zeros, you're going to have 3 factors. And remember, you get those factors by thinking about, well, how did you get 1? Well, you got 1 by saying x minus 1 equals 0, didn't you? And you got 4 by saying x minus 4 equals 0. And you got negative 2 by saying x plus 2 equals 0. And that's all you do. All right? So that's number 1. Okay, now let's look at number 2. Okay, number 2, we have this function. So we have g of x equals x cubed minus 9x squared plus 11x plus 21. All right, and so you want to find part A. Part A, you want to list the possible rational zeros. Possible rational zeros. Okay, and so remember, to list the possible rational zeros, you're going to do p divided by q. P divided by q. Okay, and so p, remember, are the factors of 21. So p would be plus or minus 1, plus or minus 3, because 3 goes into 21. And then 3 times 7 is 21, so we're going to list plus or minus 7, and then plus or minus 21. And then q are the factors of the leading coefficient, which is 1, so just plus or minus 1. So p divided by q would be each of these divided by plus or minus 1. So you're going to get, so your answer will be plus or minus 1, 3 divided by 1, 7 divided by 1, 21 divided by 1. So you got plus or minus 1, plus or minus 3, plus or minus 7, plus or minus 21. Okay? All right, and then part B says, use synthetic division to find one rational zero, and then use the depressed polynomial, which is your quotient, to find the other zeros. And then you're going to factor for part C. Okay, so let's try 1 again. See what happens. Okay, so we're going to try 1. It may not be any of these work. It may be number 21 works, right? So we got to try, trial and error, just try them. So you got to try each one. I would try the smallest first. Plus, so let's try 1 first. So the leading coefficients are 1, negative 9, 11, and 21. All right, so let's see what happens. Let's see if 1's a 0. Remember, 1's a 0 if my remainder is 0. So bring another 1. 1 times 1 is 1. Add negative 9 and 1's negative 8. Multiply, you get negative 8. Add, you get 3, right? And then multiply, you get 3. Add, you get 21, and 3 is 24. Okay? All right, so let me make sure I did this. Okay, so 24. So that's not 0, right? So the remainder is not 0. Correct? So that means that 1's not a 0. 1 is not a 0. So now let's try negative 1. See if negative 1 works. If that doesn't work, I'll try 3, then negative 3, and so on. So let's try negative 1. So 1, negative 9, 11, 21. Bring down the 1. Negative 1 times 1 is negative 1. Add, you get negative 10. Multiply, negative 1 times negative 10 is positive 10. add, you get 21. Multiply -1 times 21 is -21, and notice I get 0. So there's your remainder, so that means -1 is a 0. Okay, so now my quotient, or the depressed polynomial, okay, remember this was cubic, right? This was cubic, so that means that this is going to be quadratic, x squared, x, and your constant. So my depressed polynomial, or your quotient is x squared minus 10x plus 21. And so if I want to find the other zeros, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this quadratic this quadratic expression equal to 0. So I'm going to solve this quadratic equation. So it's factorable. So we're going to get x minus 7 times x minus 3 equals 0. And so I get x minus 7 equals 0, x minus 3 equals 0. And so my zeros, my other zeros are 7 and 3, right? And so altogether my zeros are, I found one up here, -1, 7, and 3. And so in part C, you're going to factor. So if -1's a 0, then x plus 1 has to be a factor because that's how you got -1. You said that equal to 0. If 7 is a 0, you got 7 by saying x minus 7 equals 0, right? So x minus 7. And then the same thing for 3, x minus 3. And oops, I forgot to say g of x equal, so that's equal to g of x. Okay, and so that's it. So that's number 2. All right, let's look at number 3. So in number 3, we have this function, number 3. So we have h of x equals 2x cubed plus 3x squared minus 5x minus 6. Okay? And so you want part A, you want to list all possible rational zeros. All right, now remember how you did this. To list all possible rational zeros, you did p divided by q. P divided by q. And remember, to do that, p are the factors of -6. So p would be plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 3, plus or minus 6. And q are the factors, the integer factors of the leading coefficient, which is 2. So plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2. And then all you do is take each of these divided by each of these. All right, so 1 divided by 1 is 1, right? So the answer, you're going to say plus or minus 1. 1 divided by 2 is 1/2, plus or minus 1/2. Now let's do the 2. 2 divided by 1 is 2, so plus or minus 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. You already have it listed, so I'll list it again. Okay? Then we do 3 divided by 1 is plus or minus 3. 3 divided by 2 is plus or minus 3/2. And then do the 6. 6 divided by 1 is plus or minus 6. And then 6 divided by 2 is 3. We already have it listed right here. So those are your possible rational zeros. All right, so now we're going to do part B. So part B, we're going to find one rational zero using synthetic division, and then take that depressed polynomial and factor it to find the other zeros. So let's try 1. And then so my leading coefficients are, remember, if there are any missing terms, and there aren't any here, but if there were, remember the 0. You have 2, 3, -5, -6. All right, so we bring on the 2. 2 times 1 is 2. We add, we get 5. 1 times 5 is 5. You add, you get 0. 1 times 0 is 0. You add, you get -6. So that's not 0. So that means 1 is not a 0. So let's try -1. Let's see if -1 works. Do the same thing. 2, 3, -5, -6. Bring down the 2. -1 times 2 is -2. Add, you get 1. Multiply, you get -1. Add, you get -6. -1 times -6 is +6, and you get 0. So my remainder is 0, so that means -1 is a 0. So now my depressed polynomial, these are the coefficients, so that's x squared, that's x. So my depressed polynomial, or my quotient, is 2x squared plus x minus 6. So I'm going to set that equal to 0. Okay, and then I'm going to factor. So when I factor, I get 2x, x, and let's try let's make this, so see that's a negative 6. Let's make this 3 and this 2 and see what happens. So let's make this plus and this minus, and that should work. All right, so setting each of those equal to 0, 2x minus 3 equals 0, x plus 2 equals 0. So x is 3 halves, and x is negative 2. So those are the other two zeros. So my zeros altogether are negative 1, 3 halves, and negative 2. So now we're going to factor. So part C, we're going to factor. So h of x will equal. All right, so this one's easy right here, because if negative 1's a 0, then that means x plus 1's a factor. If negative 2's a 0, then that means x plus 2 is a factor. Now be careful here. So if 3 halves is 0, you got to remember how you got 3 halves. So you got 3 halves by saying 2x minus 3 equals 0. So be careful. So you got to rewrite this. So it's kind of like saying this. So x minus 3 halves, right, equals 0. That's how you got it. So you're gonna clear the fraction. So you're gonna multiply both sides by 2. And so we multiply both sides by 2. I get 2x minus 3 equals 0. And so that's that factor you see here. All right. And then finally, number 4. So let's look at number 4. So in number 4, we have this for number 4. So we have f of x is equal to 4x cubed minus 3x squared minus 9x minus 2. All right, and so we want part A, you want to list the possible rational zeros. You want to list the possible rational zeros, and so remember to do that, remember that P divided by Q, right? P divided by Q. So P, remember, are the factors of the factors of your constant term. So that's negative 2, so it's plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2. And Q would be the factors of your leading coefficient, which is 4, so it'll be plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 4. And so P divided by Q would be each of these divided by each of these. So you get plus or minus 1, then plus or minus 1/2, and then plus or minus 1/4, and then plus or minus 2. Now notice 2 divided by 2 is 1, so you're going to already have it listed, and then 2 divided by 4 is 1/2, and you already have it listed. So here are your possible rational zeros. Plus or minus 1, plus or minus 1/2, plus or minus 2, and that's it. All right, so those are your possible rational zeros. Okay, now, so let's do part B now. So part B is where you're going to try and find one rational zero that is a 0. So let's try negative 1. See if that works. So here are my leading my terms, and it's already in descending order. So my leading coefficient would be 4, negative 3, negative 9, and negative 2. And I don't have any missing terms, so you don't see any zeros there. Any zeros to be placed. Okay, 4. Negative 1 times 4 is negative 4. Add, I get negative 7. Negative 1 times negative 7 is a positive 7. Add, you get negative 2. Negative 1 times negative 2 is a positive 2. Add, you get 0. So there's a remainder. So I already found right away, I found that negative 1 is a 0. So here's my depressed polynomial now. So my depressed polynomial, or my quotient, is 4x squared minus 7x minus 2. All right, and so now I'm going to set that equal to 0. So I'm going to find my other zeros, set that equal to 0. And so when I factor this, I'm going to get 4x plus 1 times x minus 2. And so I'm going to set each factor equal to 0. Okay, and so I get my other zeros to be negative 1/2 and then 2. So those are my other zeros. So all my zeros together are rational, and they are -1, -1/2, and 2. And then part C, to factor, you want to factor f of x. So you're going to say f of x equal. So I have 3 rational zeros. So if -1 is a 0, then that means x plus 1 is a factor, because that's how I get -1 when I say it equals 0. Let's do the 2. If 2 is a 0, then x plus 2 is a factor. Now, I'm sorry, x minus 2, excuse me. Be careful, x minus 2, because x minus 2 equals 0 gives me 2. Okay, now be careful with this one. You don't want any fractions here, so you got to think. So if -1/2 is a 0, then that means x plus 1/2 equals 0 is how I got -1/2, right? So let's clear that fraction. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 2. So I get 2x plus 1 equals 0, and that's what goes here. So 2x plus 1 goes here. All right. And so that is the key to topic 24, part B.